Hey everyone, I'm Jack.
And I'm Alex.
And in today's video, we'll be ranking the bosses of the Resident Evil HD remaster from worst to best. Alongside Silent Hill 1999, Resident Evil is the most influential horror game of all time. Aside from beginning the Resident Evil series, its design, structure, and split narrative marked the birth of the survival horror genre that, after far too long in dormancy, has come back in full force with the likes of the Dead Space remake, the Callisto Protocol, Resident Evil 2, 3, and 4 remake, Silent Hill 2 remake, and on and on and on. While a massive market success with around $467 million in sales with inflation, Resident Evil's definitive version is generally regarded to be the top-down remake of the 1996 original, released on the Nintendo GameCube and PlayStation 2 in 2002. With the potential of new 6th-gen consoles' hardware relative to those of the 5th generation at the time, legendary director Shinji Mikami felt that he would be able to fully capture his original vision of Resident Evil with this new age of gaming that simply wasn't possible with the original PlayStation's hardware capabilities. As such, the remake was released in 2002 to much applause from fans and critics alike, raving over its innovative particle lighting and graphics, improved narrative and voice acting, and impressive gameplay. In 2015, the remake was remastered in a 16:9 aspect ratio in replacement to 4:3 and was ported to the PlayStation 3 and 4. And after playing through it, I was pleasantly surprised at how much I enjoyed the experience. As will be a theme with the majority of our Resident Evil boss rankings, our overall thoughts on these games will be limited to a few brief overarching statements, as we'd like to save them for our reviews of the mainline Resident Evil titles. Either way, the combat was one of noticeably older fashion, and because of this, the boss fights aren't particularly fleshed out and barely differ in gameplay experience. As such, this ranking was more of a subjective op-ed on how generally interesting they were and the importance of their story context as compared to the literal quality of the fights themselves. There were still a grand total of 8 fights, however, and most were alright. How did they rank? Let's find out.
There is very little to this boss. It's a spider, but with the T-virus. He likes puking on you and dislikes getting grenades detonated next to his big fat scrotum. Jack vaporized this guy in mere seconds, so being the good sport that I am, I ran laps around him for a little while until I got bored and decided to wrap it up. The only claim to fame this fight will ever have is being the subject of our secret 2-year anniversary upload linked in the description. A little Easter egg for those of you who may care.
As Resident Evil's most tragic character, its shameful Lisa Trevor's send-off was little more than a Nintendo-esque gimmick. While most boss fights rely on Resident Evil's simplistic combat to make do, which naturally does the job fine, the unkillable Lisa Trevor is finished off by pushing chained rocks off a cliff connected to a coffin? To keep it light, an unsatisfying conclusion. You can kill Lisa Trevor technically, even though it's more of a minute-long stun than a full-on death, in a similar vein to other stalkers and tyrants in the Resident Evil series, but the rocks are your only escape still. Before the fight, Jill finds the suspicious Barry at the coffin and confronts him, followed by a choice of either giving him his Magnum revolver or not. This decision impacts the rest of the game as well as Lisa's fight. Should Barry stay alive, he will shoot Lisa and be another focus for her, and if not, he dies. Originally, I decided on letting Barry live, but promptly died, so I let Barry go on his merry way in my following attempt, while Alex kept to the canon and let him live. Oops. Once you remove the chains, the central coffin's lid opens, revealing it to be Lisa's mother's, with which Lisa takes her mother's skull and jumps off the altar stand. Lisa doesn't actually die from this, however. As revealed in the Umbrella Chronicles, Wesker and Lisa had a final showdown all throughout the first and second floors of Spencer Mansion, ending with Wesker crushing her with a chandelier and the mansion blowing up soon after. Back to Lisa's plunge into darkness, it all starts with her mother Jessica, who was the wife of Spencer Mansion architect George Trevor. After being invited to Spencer Mansion by future Umbrella founder Oswell E. Spencer, Jessica and Lisa were taken by the mansion's employees upon arrival for research and testing, with the mother and child being used as the type Type A and Type B subjects for the progenitor virus, the original strain of what would eventually become the T-virus. While Jessica died early on in testing, the virus evolved in Lisa, deforming her into the creature you find in the mountains, and the virus itself eventually mutated into the G-virus, later found in Lisa's corpse by Dr. William Birkin. Resident Evil games tend to start fairly grounded and by the end push the weirdness boundaries to their respective limits. Lisa Trevor, as well as her subsequent boss fight, are no exceptions. That said, weird isn't always the answer, and if anything, the game's non-linear story progression makes Lisa Trevor's conclusion one of the undeservingly lamer boss fights in the Resident Evil series.
Spencer is my last name, if you guys never knew. Theoretically speaking, should this channel ever become enormously profitable, I could very well purchase a mansion, name it after myself, and use it as a research base for Inhuman Horrors. I would not, however, spend my time trying to make evil plants, because that's dumb as shit. That's where this train of thought ends, at least in reality. Umbrella didn't give two fucks how stupid it sounded and went ahead and did it anyways. Plant 42 can be weeded out in two ways. Either you bring the fight to the upstairs area and give it a taste of gunpowder herbicide, or you sneakily craft a lethal chemical like in a Hogwarts potions class. If you chose Jill, the easy mode character like us and the rest of the human population I've ever talked to, you probably took route numero 2. In which case, the fight is just selecting your tank of Vigils and unleashing the power of Brown Muck. Riveting. One might wonder where Umbrella finds their seemingly infinite supply of mad scientists to make these things despite every creature they've ever made having a kill count well into the double digits. This must be the timeline where playing classical music for incubating fetuses actually made them geniuses. Plant 42 is hardly even a boss fight as much as it is a level hazard or a door, but in a game without super concrete bosses, we're not going to split hairs over this crap.
Yawn. Did you? That's also the name given to the Umbrella bioorganic weapon you fight multiple times throughout your journey through the Arklay Mountains. Yawn is a 40-foot, 26,000-pound snake that you fight twice in the Spencer Mansion, with the second bout in the closed-off 2F library. For an early 2000s boss fight, Yawn has surprisingly creative arena design, with verticality and a central wall that he wraps himself around. I had no idea this fight happened when it did, and I unpreparedly entered it with 9 shotgun shells and 10 handgun rounds, somehow killing the creature with my very last bullet. Oversized enemies in this game are a major nuisance to fight because of the combat's aim system, which only works on a vertical plane and commonly misses with larger targets, weirdly enough. The second Yawn fight is not as atmospheric nor intimidating as the first, leaving it behind its predecessor without much debate.
I'm sure you've all noticed a trend in the bosses so far. It's a thing from nature, but with the T-virus. The T-virus, apparently, rather than causing necrosis and brain damage in non-humans, just makes them incredibly large and aggressive. Sounds like super steroids, really. Anyways, this fight is exactly like the other one, but instead of a library where you can easily lead it around in a loop, you at least need a little more zombie training skill to make it out of this attic bout. Just like any other creature in this game that's large and blocks off your progress, your best play is lobbing acid pills at it until it gets dissolved into bloody porridge. At least, that's kinda what you'd think acid rounds would do. The snake just gets spooked and bails to live another day. Or encounter, rather. This fight is like that mythical train movie incident in early 20th century Chicago. While probably terrifying at the time, being scared by it looks insane to people in the modern age. Not much else to add. In 2022, Yawn is not much more than an unintentionally accurately named hitch in the path through the Spencer Mansion.
Neptune is a tension-building set piece that gives the Aqua Ring life and nothing beyond that. So, why is it here? As you'll come to see in our Resident Evil boss rankings, set pieces, so long as they're unique and have enough spectacle to feel similar enough in gameplay to a boss fight, take the T-Virus alligator from Resident Evil 2, will usually count. What Alex and I decided was the boss fight in question is the Panic Door puzzle in Aqua Ring B1, a game of figuring out how to solve a slew of convenient problems just as you need the protective system to work. The tension comes in Neptune continuously banging into the glass wall, with each passing hit decreasing the wall's damage limit up until the creature breaks through and kills you. I managed to die a few times because I was doing it without a guide, and like the safe locks from RE2, this is just a matter of figuring out which step is next by pressing X in front of every switch and lever until you get it right. After draining the water, you find Neptune in Aqua Ring B2. Barely alive. This is where you get the Residence Gallery key and kill the creature, that is, unless you forget to electrocute the water and get eaten, and restart the game with about an hour of progress lost. Nonetheless, Neptune is fun and different, and while not necessarily a combat-oriented boss fight, set-piece gimmicks like it give the endgame a necessary fresh experience. Crimson Heads are a pretty forgettable mechanic that appear rarely due to the oversupply of kerosene, a total nuisance of a mechanic unless you're a hypochondriac like me. Actually, Crimson Heads are so forgettable that we forgot about this boss entirely until I had already finished editing this video on my bus ride home from college. I'm just danking your chain. This boss is number 3 for a reason, and Crimson Heads are badass. The Crimson Head prototype was an Umbrella employee who got infected with the T-Virus Epsilon strain, and after massacring his caretakers was stuffed in a coffin and built into the Spencer Mansion's crypt. With each death mask, the coffin spills more blood and shakes more intensely until after the 4th mask, the zombie breaks loose and goes feral, putting up the most fight of any boss in the game. Crimson Heads are faster than Jill and Chris, and with their basic swipe attacks can chainlock you. While frustrating, they have less kinetic force than that of a tortoise and go flying back with a point-blank blast from a shotgun. There are actually 6 shells outside the crypt that you probably picked up immediately into your run, but, this coming from a veteran, you're best leaving them until this fight, as the Crimson Head is maybe the girthiest health bar relative to any other boss, and 5 to 6 shots is just enough to do him in. Fun, intense, and dangerous, the Crimson Head prototype is exceptional for a mini-boss and one of the best fights overall in Resident Evil.
Lisa Trevor is sort of like a tranquilized Mr. X, or perhaps Resident Evil 3 Remake's take on Nemesis is a more apt comparison. She materializes at particular moments in the game whenever you draw near to the cave, such as the cabin and the tunnels, and she does her best to pimp slap you to death. Fortunately, her best is not really all that dangerous. She mostly just slouches towards you at a speed comparable to tank control maneuvering, making her pretty easy to evade. That said, it's still rather unnerving knowing that something nearby wants to kill you and is seeking you out. It's a lot like that whole killer snail trend from TikTok a few months back, if you're familiar. No danger so long as you stay moving and stay alert. You don't really have a good reason to attack her here, but you can stun her briefly with a few shotguns to the torso and send her flesh tentacles flailing while you make a dash past her if need be. You might as well just let her do her thing, to be honest. Her life fucking sucks anyways. I would be a horrible crank if my parents were callously murdered, my body and mind were horribly mutated, and I was doomed to spend my life as a cave freak also. Compassion goes a long way.
What should be a surprise to few, the original Tyrant that served as the prototype for the likes of Mr. X and Nemesis is by far Resident Evil's best boss fight. From a purely gameplay perspective, it's not as inventively designed as Lisa Trevor and has a very primitive moveset that isn't helped by its structurally basic and environmentally generic laboratory setting. That said, where the Tyrant shines is its story implications, atmosphere, and artistic design. The T-002 Tyrant was Arclay Laboratories' first successful Tyrant project creation in Umbrella USA's quest to craft the ultimate life form. Through an infection and surgery with the Epsilon strand of T-Virus, the T-002 fully developed into a sentient creature with near-human intellect and the capability to understand and follow a large range of basic commands. The Tyrant Jill encounters in the underground laboratory was the last remaining Tyrant in the T-002 generation, with the rest of its embryonic clones being transferred to Nest and William Birkin to eventually become T-103 Tyrants, the most famous of which being Resident Evil 2's Mr. X. As I said way back in the first Lisa Trevor boss segment, whether or not Barry lives is vital to the endgame's outcome. Should he die, Jill finds Wesker in the laboratory's B4 layer, and shortly thereafter the Tyrant breaks free of its test tube and stabs Wesker through the torso. After you defeat the Tyrant, you free Chris and escape the Arclay Mountains scot-free. However, if Barry lives past Lisa Trevor, you'll still find Wesker in B4, but Barry being alive holds you at gunpoint until he finds the opportune time to shoot Wesker, who afterwards escapes. You still fight Tyrant alone, however, after the creature knocks Barry unconscious. The fight itself is unsurprisingly simplistic, featuring 2 arms with just a single attack with each. It lacks significant health, and only a few rounds from either the Magnum or grenade launcher should kill it. Following this initial showdown, once you free Chris, Barry activates the facility's self-destruct sequence. When Jill reaches the rooftops and shoots an SOS flare to Brad, Chris and Barry rejoin Jill only to find the Tyrant re-emerge from the collapsing structure, alive again and seemingly reborn. This Super Tyrant's moveset is still generally the same, but with the inclusion of a lunge sprint. And considering how often during this fight the Tyrant is off camera, as well as how fast he moves in this animation, this is debatably the most frustrating attack in the game. Still, with just a couple rounds from the Magnum, Brad will drop the rocket launcher from the sky and you finish off the Tyrant in epic fashion, now a staple of every finale in the Resident Evil series. This is the most cinematic, lore-important, and atmospherically spectacular boss in Resident Evil without much competition. With great lore, fun gameplay, and one of the best visual designs in the series, the Tyrant is well deserving of its #1 billing.
Thanks so much for watching, and we hope you enjoyed. This is just the tip of the Sight and Nox Resident Evil iceberg, as we'll soon cover a lot of the other games. Stay tuned for those if you enjoyed this. That's all for now. Deuces.